Ladies and gentlemen, will you please be seated, and in a moment you will stand again. As all of you know, this is the largest dinner ever held at the White House, and that in itself would make it important. I think you should also know that in this great house, the most distinguished men and women of the world have been entertained. Emperors and kings and presidents and leaders from virtually every nation of the world have been honored here. And of course, they have honored this house by being here. But I know that I speak for all of the American people when I say that never has the White House been more proud than it is tonight because of the guests we have tonight.
No good. There it is. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My name is Jim Byron. I'm the president and CEO of the Richard Nixon Foundation, and it's my honor to welcome you. Thank you. To welcome you all back to the Nixon Library on behalf of the board of directors and the Nixon family. It's a special privilege for us to honor you this evening, 50 years to the day that you celebrated your homecoming at the White House. And this evening, we're joined by a few special guests to celebrate with you. Representing the family of President and Mrs. Nixon, please welcome Tricia Nixon Cox, the eldest daughter of President and Mrs. Nixon. And Edward Cox, her husband and the chairman of the New York Republican Party. Ed? Ed and Tricia have an additional distinction in that they were at the dinner 50 years ago at the White House with all of you. I'd also like to welcome Melanie Eisenhower, the youngest granddaughter of President and Mrs. Nixon and the daughter of Julie Nixon Eisenhower and David Eisenhower. And Melanie's husband, Joseph Sergio. We're joined by a number of members of the board of directors of the Richard Nixon Foundation, including Ambassador Robert O'Brien, chairman of the board. Charlie Zhang, our treasurer. Everett Alvarez, who I know you all know. Larry Higby, Ken Kachigian, Maureen Nunn, and our great former governor of the state of California, Governor Pete Wilson. I'd like to welcome Senator Tom Carper, the only Vietnam War veteran serving in the United States Senate, from whom we will be hearing a bit later in the evening. Thank you for being here, Senator. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the major sponsors and supporters of this 50th anniversary homecoming celebration, and you're now going to be able to see them on the screens beside me. But I'd like to thank our major supporters, the Air Power Foundation, American Airlines, and Randy Stillinger is here this evening, who manages all the military affairs, the Gary Sinise Foundation, In-N-Out Burger, Sarah and Ross Perot Jr., in honor of Ross Perot Sr. Thank you for what you've done, and thank you for being here. And of course, Ling and Charlie Zhang, who are underwriting the dinner this evening. Thank you. Working with the NAMPOW organization, we pulled together a tremendous group of individuals, companies, and foundations to welcome you here this evening. So on behalf of the NAMPOW organization and the Richard Nixon Foundation, I want to thank everyone for their support. In a room in which everyone is a special guest, it can be a tad awkward to single out a few. But I know that you will support me in this brief indulgence, as I want to recognize Medal of Honor recipient Robert Patterson, who is a guest this evening. He was awarded the Medal of Honor for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action at the risk of his life by President Nixon at the White House Rose Garden in 1969. Thank you for being here. I'd like to welcome His Excellency Ambassador Mishal Altani, the Ambassador of Qatar to the United States of America. Thank you for being here, Mr. Ambassador. As well as General T. Michael Mosley, the longtime Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force. Major General Benjamin Watson is the Commanding General of the 1st Marine Division, and we not only welcome him, but thank him for his support and the support of the United States Marine Corps to bring this 50th anniversary to life. Thank you, General. I'd like to recognize also Tamara Martin, who is the recently appointed director of the Nixon Presidential Library's Federal Operations with the National Archives and Records Administration. Thank you, Tamara. Now, let's begin our evening in prayer as Robert Surton delivers this evening's invocation.
Let us pray. O Lord, our governor, bless the leaders of our land, that we may be a people at peace among ourselves and a blessing to other nations of the earth. To the president and members of the cabinet, to governors of states, mayors of cities, and all in administrative authority, grant wisdom and grace in the exercise of their duties. To senators and representatives and those who make laws in our states, cities, and towns, give courage, wisdom, and foresight, provide for the needs of our people, and to fulfill our obligations in the community of nations. To the judges and officers of our courts, give understanding and integrity, that human rights may be safeguarded and justice served. We commend to your gracious care in keeping all the men and women of our armed forces at home and abroad. Defend them day by day with your heavenly grace. Strengthen them in their trials and temptations. Give them courage to face the perils which beset them, and grant them a sense of your abiding presence wherever they may be. Look with favor upon all of our members of our Vietnam prisoners of war as we strive to fulfill our commitment to live in honor. Give us courage, patience, and vision, and strengthen us to speak clearly to this nation about the honorable work accomplished by our men and women in uniform in defense of this nation and our allies, and advocate for those who have been left behind. And finally, teach our people to rely on your strength and to accept their responsibilities to their fellow citizens, that they may elect trustworthy leaders and make wise decisions for the well-being of our society, and that we may serve you faithfully in our generation and honor your holy name. For yours is the kingdom, O Lord, and you are exalted as head above all. Amen.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I now invite you to stand for the presentation of the colors in the national anthem by the United States Marine Corps Honor Guard and OC Music and Dance.
Trumpets, at the ready. 1, 2, 3.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Welcome POWs Everett Alvarez and Tom Hanton.
Thank you. On behalf of the Vietnam POWs organization, I want to take this opportunity to show our appreciation to the Richard Nixon Presidential Library, to the Board of Directors for hosting our Golden Anniversary reunions celebrating 50 years of freedom. I also want to recognize Jim Byron's staff and the people that worked long and hard in arranging all of the events. The ceremonies beginning yesterday, followed by the tour and the barbecue, and tonight's events are due to a lot of their hard work, but they did it with enthusiasm, and I could see that in their words of expression, and I could see that we could see it in the results. And so I want you all to know that this is truly appreciated for all of the staff and the volunteers and all who worked on these events. I also wanted to note, fellas, you think you've received enough attention now? Well, you know, for the past 50 years, each of you in your own way have been telling our story. And what you have done is that you've established a legacy of what we are and what we represent, all of you. You know, our circumstances were unique, but what people recognize and what the American public recognizes is how we dealt with those circumstances. They recognize that, you know, you responded with character, courage, resiliency, and honor. And that's what they see when you talk about the POWs of the Vietnam War. They do. I get those statements from people and strangers all the time, and I'm sure you do exactly that. So this profile that we now have established is one that's going to be around for generations. And all I want to say is, you guys, you can be proud of that. I want to note that we came home 50 years ago, but many did not. And we have Tom Hanton to remind us of those memories and what we're doing to remember our MIAs.
There's nothing more enthusiastic for me than being around a bunch of like-minded warriors and patriots, and tonight is the best of all. For those of you who are unfamiliar with how warriors pay homage to their missing, this small table is the Vietnam War era depiction of that. A little history. It was started in at tactics conferences in Thailand in the mid-60s when the Navy, Marines, and Air Force fighter pilots gathered to improve their tactics. And at the end of those tactics conferences, they would have a dinner, not as elaborate as this dinner, but similar, more formal as you can be in a combat zone. And I don't know the name, and I don't think the names of the guys who designed this table, but I'll describe the items that are on this table to give you the context of how we pay homage to our missing men in today's world, to be men and women. I use that term generically. So the small table indicates one man, soldiers, battle against many. It's covered with a white tablecloth to honor the soldier's pure heart when he answers his country's call to duty. A lemon slice is placed on the plate with grains of salt to show a captive soldier's bitter fate and the tears of the families who wait for that patriot's return. An empty chair is at the table for the missing soldiers who are not with us tonight. The black napkin is for the sorrow of captivity for those who were POWs. And the turned over glass is symbolic of the meal that will not be eaten. The white candle is for peace. And finally, the red rose in the vase, tied with a red ribbon, is for the hope that all of our missing will return someday. Let's eat.
Ladies and gentlemen, I invite you to take your seats as we begin the program. Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to begin the program this evening in your honor with someone who was not only there 50 years ago at the White House dinner on the South Lawn, but whose negotiating skills in Paris representing President Nixon no doubt helped put the wheels in motion that secured your freedom. Dr. Henry Kissinger would be here with you this evening, but he celebrates his 100th birthday on Saturday. So I think you can understand that travel to California would be difficult. So let's begin this evening's program with Dr. Kissinger.
It is a great joy to be permitted to speak to you on this 10th anniversary of my last address to you and the 50th anniversary of celebrating with you your return from captivity. No issue concerned President Nixon more than the safety and return of the prisoners of war, which he inherited from its predecessors. But he considered it also a national duty for the sake of all the people who relied on America, that America not give up in the support of an ally, because that would shake the faith of people in America. I met weekly, often, and at any rate frequently, with the wives who came to see what could be done to expedite your return. But I'm happy to tell you that these meetings were attempts at mutual support, and that the efforts to encourage the families to blame their government never succeeded. You performed a great service at a difficult and in some respects tragic time for America. But your fortitude, the fortitude of your families, and the dignity with which you bore your fate will long be remembered. At the end of the war, I paid a visit to Hanoi to wind up the details. And your captors offered me to take John McCain with me on my airplane as the first prisoner to be returned. But I knew that to take one person on a presidential plane after all the months of suffering, and for that prisoner to be the son of the commander of the Pacific would not have been appropriate. So when I met John McCain 3 months later, after an additional prison endurance, I was wondering what he would say to me. But he made it easy. He came up to me and said, "I want to thank you for saving my honor." He became a lifelong friend, and he became to me a symbol of what you achieved, which was to preserve the honor and purpose of your country. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk to you. This is my 100th year, so I look forward to seeing you all at your next 10th anniversary.
Ladies and gentlemen, from the state of Delaware, please welcome United States Senator Tom Carper.
Hello, Delaware. Oh, I'm sorry, where am I? When I was in the Navy, I used to be stationed up the road at Moffett Field Naval Air Station. Pete and I were good buddies when I was governor, and it's wonderful to be back out here. We have a son who lives up in San Francisco. Anybody here ever been to Delaware? Anybody here ever been to? Anybody here ever incorporated in Delaware? Anybody been to our 5-star beaches? We have more 5-star beaches than any state in America. You don't believe that? Great beaches, great beaches. The Constitution of our country was first ratified in Delaware. And on December 7th, 1787, before anybody else did it, we took that Constitution, which was sent down from Philadelphia, and 25 men met at the Golden Fleece Tavern in Dover, Delaware, debated it, and embraced it, and voted for it unanimously. For one whole week, starting on December 7th, 1787, for one whole week, Delaware was the entire United States of America. I'm told it was a good week. Good week. Democracy is a hard way to govern. Winston Churchill used to say, democracy is the worst form of government devised by wit of man, except for all the rest. It is a hard way to govern. And those of us who've been privileged to serve in elective office and state level, local level, national level know exactly what that means. I want to take just a minute to note the words of our Constitution are words on a piece of paper. They are made real by the sacrifice of men and women who wear the uniform, the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, and are willing to risk their life and limb to save our democracy, to protect our Constitution, and to make sure that our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren have a country like this to grow up in. Vietnam veterans, as much as any veterans I've known, have helped protect that democracy. Thank you for remembering that and making sure that we give them the tribute and the appreciation that they deserve. I have a printed speech here. I'm going to just set it aside and just talk to you from my heart. I'm the last Vietnam veteran serving in the United States Senate. I'm also the grandson of a Gold Star mother, the son of a Navy Chief Petty Officer for 30 years. My uncles were sergeants and in the Marine Corps and in the Army in World War II and Korea after that. I was lucky enough when I was 17 years old to win a Navy scholarship and went to Ohio State, studied economics, and graduated and became a naval flight officer. I graduated in '68, right at the height of the Vietnam War, And a week later, I was on my way to Pensacola, Florida, to become a naval flight officer. A year later, I joined my squadron, Moffett Field, California, Navy P-3 squadron, and we were on our way to Southeast Asia, the first of 3 deployments that I would take. Our job in that part of the world was to fly surveillance missions, tracking Soviet submarines from the Sea of Japan into the Indian Ocean, from the west coast of the United States all the way to the South China Sea. Our jobs were also to conduct surveillance operations to intercept infiltrator trawlers coming down from North Vietnam to resupply the Viet Cong in South Vietnam in their efforts to overthrow the government of South Vietnam, our ally. Believe it or not, we would track these trawlers. They looked like fishing boats, but they weren't. In many cases, they had arms and other kinds of bad weaponry, and they were just trying to get in to resupply the Viet Cong. Our job was to hand off those trawlers, those infiltrator trawlers, to the Navy swift boats and to the Coast Guard. One of the captains of a Navy swift boat was a guy named John Kerry, highly decorated member of the Navy at the time. And that was the first time I ever met him. Later, I'd meet John McCain, and we become brothers in a bond, if you know what I mean. Later on, I would have the opportunity, after being in the Navy, to go back to move to Delaware to get an MBA and to also be elected to office. I was elected 29 as elected state treasurer when I was 6 years later, I was elected to Congress and joined John McCain. He and I were elected on the same day. But beginning that day, I went to work to say, we got to find out what's happened to our MIAs. We got to find out what happened to the folks that I served with, that John served with, and others, John Kerry served. We got to find out what happened to them and get to the truth. We started seeing, you may recall, pictures on the cover of Newsweek, pictures on the cover of Time magazine, and major newspapers of folks who were alleged to be U.S. military personnel being held after the war by the Vietnamese as prisoners. And I was visited by a lot of veterans organizations who said, you ought to do something about this. You're a Vietnam veteran, why don't you do something about this? And I put together a congressional delegation, bipartisan congressional delegation in the House. And we went to see President George Herbert Walker Bush and said, Mr. President, you've been seeing these pictures, your folks have been seeing these pictures, we got to do something about this. Thank God, he said, count me in. And what we did was we put together a CODEL, the bipartisan CODEL, and we went to Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. We first landed at Saigon in Vietnam and met with some of the leadership there. We arrived at a time when the Vietnamese Communist Party was holding a convention, if you will, up in Hanoi to select their leader for the next generation. And President Bush had said, there is a Gorbachev-like person in the communist leadership. If that person ends up as the leader of Vietnam, that's somebody we can deal with and somebody we can work with and maybe even find the truth about our MIAs and have normalized relations. We went over there, arrived, went to Saigon. They hadn't had their party convention up in Hanoi, so we went on to Cambodia. What we found in Cambodia was a criminal ring who had been using dumbing up pictures of Soviet nationals in their news magazines back in Russia, and they cut them out, and they made them appear to be American soldiers, and they used them to extort money from the families of POWs. Literally, that ring was uncovered when we were in Phnom Penh in Cambodia. We went from there on into Laos and then back into to Vietnam. We were about ready to leave. We had been into Hanoi earlier, and they hadn't finished their party convention. So but anyway, we ended up back in Hanoi, in Saigon, and it was about time for us to come home. And we got a phone call from the folks up in Hanoi. He said, look, the Communist Party has finally finished their deliberation, they have selected as their new leader a change agent, a Gorbachev-like guy. It was the guy that President Bush told us about. His name is Demoy. And they said Demoy wants, before you go back to the U.S., he wants you to come and meet with him. Next morning, we got on our plane, Air Force plane, we flew up to Hanoi, and we went to meet with him. And we met in a beautiful, beautiful home in Hanoi, and we met in a large living room, and there was 6 of us, a couple of aides. Demoy came in, and he had a couple of aides and an interpreter with him, and we shook hands and sat down. And what I would do when we'd meet with foreign leaders like that, I would introduce one by one the members of my CODEL, who they were, where they come from. We gotten word that Demoy had been a house painter at one time. Well, one of my guys in my delegation, a Marine from Maryland, Wayne Gilchrist, he'd been a house painter. We found out that Demoy had been a teacher at one time. Well, as it turns out, Wayne Gilchrist had been a teacher at one time. We found out that Demoy had served in the military. Wayne Gilchrist served in the military. We found that Demoy was injured severely. So was Wayne Gilchrist. And when I went through all of this, all of a sudden, Demoy asked me just to stop. And he said to Wayne Gilchrist, we're sitting about 10 feet apart, almost like across the table. And Demoy said to Wayne Gilchrist, he said, through an interpreter, where were you shot? And Wayne started telling what part of the country he was shot in. He said, no, in your body. And Wayne pointed to his, right here in his chest. And Demoy stood up and he said to Wayne, may I see your wound? And Wayne just sat there. None of us moved. And then he said, again, may I see your wound? We all sat there frozen. And Demoy got up and he walked across the room where Wayne was sitting. He reached down and gently picked him up. We were wearing these loose white shirts, loose-fitting white shirts. And he picked him up and he said, once again, may I see your wound? And then he turned Wayne around and lifted up his shirt. And there in his back, right on his back, was this really ugly wound. It was still there. And Demoy took his finger and he just went around the circumference of the wound, pulled down the shirt, and they embraced. They embraced. I want to tell you, I thought we were going to just fall over. I didn't know. I was just stunned. Tears flowed. And about 2 minutes later, we got our composure back, sat down, and I said, Mr. Leader, we have a roadmap to normalize relations that President Bush has asked us to give you. And there are things that we want you to help us to do. We have hundreds of men. We've never found out what happened to them. They're missing. Their families are wondering. They're missing them. And we need your help. We need to be able to excavate the crash sites. We need to interview your people. We need to be able to go into museums and get all kind of information so we can basically put to rest the concerns of the families. And to his credit, he said he would agree to do that. And we agreed if they would do that, then we would establish a telecommunications. That was the first step. And then they did more, we did more. They did more, we did more. Today, there are U.S. military ships in ports in Vietnam. We actually have operations with them. They are our number nine trading partner in the world. They're number 10. We have hundreds of thousands, millions of Vietnamese people who live in our country, and they're some of the finest citizens we have in this country. I just want to share that with you and tell you that something good has come out of something that was very difficult for my generation and for a lot of people in this room. P.S. About 6 years ago, in Barack's last year as president, he invited John Kerry, John McCain, and I to go with him back to Vietnam to take the next step in really improving relations and involve the sale of military hardware and that sort of thing, military joint exercises with the Vietnamese. And so we went in Air Force One, and we landed, and I had a open morning, the second day we were there, and I jumped in a cab, and I rode over to the Hanoi Hilton, and it's smaller than it used to be, and I went in and told them who I was. A very nice young man, maybe about 20, 25 years old, spoke very good English. He was in charge of receiving guests and showing them around. And he was nice enough to show me around. One of the photographs we saw was John McCain. We had a lot of John's pictures there. Another one was Pete Peterson, who was Air Force shot down and served many years in Hanoi Hilton. Later, congressman from Florida, and eventually the first U.S. ambassador to a united Vietnam, Pete Peterson. Some of you know him. Anyway, saw those pictures. And then I came to a large portrait. It was a color portrait. It wasn't a black and white picture. It wasn't a color photograph. It was a very large portrait. And I said to the young man who was going with me, I said, who is that? And he said, that is our old leader. He used to be our leader of our country many years ago. And I said, what is his name? What is his name? And he said, Demoy. I said, you're kidding. He said, no, it's Demoy. He used to be our leader. And I said, I've met Demoy. And he said, I said, have you ever met him? And the young man said, he was here 2 weeks ago. And I said, in the Hanoi Hilton? And he said, yes. And I said, will you ever see him again? He said, he comes here regularly. He comes here regularly. And I said, would you give him a note from me and read it to him? He said that he would. And I reached in my pocket, pulled out one of my business cards, and I wrote on the back of it this message in English. I said, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, travel together. And Demoy, we decided to travel together. Your country's better for it, and so is ours. And to all the men and women who sacrificed, who laid their lives on the line at a tough time in our country, those that are still alive and those that are not, I just want to say your sacrifice, your service has been purposeful. And that this generation, my generation, and I think our children's generation and others will, for a long time, appreciate that. P.S. When I get introduced around the country to speak, people talk about I'm on this committee, I'm on that committee, I've done this legislation, I've done that. Did this as governor, put Pete, and there was all this. But you know what the people stop and really start to applaud? Is when I'm introduced as the last Vietnam veteran serving in the United States Senate. That, compared to what it was like 20, 30 years ago, has changed enormously. And I just wish that the folks who didn't get the kind of a welcome home and appreciation that we would like to have gotten, I wish they could be here to feel it now, because it's real and it's tangible. And for all of that generation, my generation, I just want to say, thanks, it's great to be home. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Hymn to the Fallen.
Thank you to Benny Yi Bing Chu, accompanied by OC Music and Dance, for that beautiful music. Thank you. I'd also like to thank Senator Carper for leading the efforts in the United States Senate to properly and fittingly honor the men in this room, and thank you for what you're doing, Senator. Perhaps no private American citizen played more of a role in spotlighting the POW MIA cause than Ross Perot Sr. You all know better than me that Mr. Perot was more than just a friend. He was an advocate and a problem solver who joined the Nixon administration in giving a voice to your cause. Mr. Perot spoke in this very room, on this very stage, 10 years ago, and here's a little reminder of what he had to say.
I'd like to thank all of you again for the incredible things you've done for our country and the incredible sacrifices you've all made for our country. And we are where we are today thanks to people like you. And I would like to ask the audience who's here tonight to join me with the British tradition of 3 cheers for all the POWs and their families here tonight. I will say in a normal voice, hip hip. You say hooray, and about that side. I'll raise my voice. You raise your voice when you say hooray. I'll say the third time around as loud as I can, and I want you to blow the roof off the building. Are you ready? Hip hip. Hooray! Hip hip. Hooray! Hip hip.
Ross Perot Sr.'s boundless generosity is his legacy, and that legacy continues through his son, Ross Perot Jr. I want to thank him and his wife, Sarah, for making possible that incredible special exhibition right here at the Nixon Library that opened today to the public in honor of all of you, our POWs, and it's called Captured, Shot Down in Vietnam. Thank you very much. And if any of you or your kids or your grandkids like to listen to podcasts, then I've got a great one for you. Because like the exhibit, it's called Captured, and you can download it now from all podcast platforms, and Sarah and Ross Perot Jr. made that podcast possible as well on behalf of Ross Perot Sr. Thank you. Ross, it's now my pleasure to welcome you to the Nixon Library this evening.
Hey, Jim, thank you very much. It is a tremendous honor for me to be here to try and represent my father, which is a difficult task. But if you remember, on the 30th anniversary, my father wasn't here, and he wrote you a letter. And at the back of that letter, I actually have it, it says, P.S. I will definitely be at the 40th and 50th reunion. He didn't quite make the 50th, but he was here with us in spirit, as you could see with that hip, hip hooray. And when I come, I've been so blessed. I don't know how many reunions I've been to with this POW family. And it is like a family reunion for me, because I grew up with these great men. And the men in this room, you're my heroes. I want to be like you. And I joined the Air Force because of the inspiration that you gave me. And Robbie Reisner was my graduation speaker at Vance. Robbie gave me his wings when I became an Air Force pilot. And right before Robbie passed away, I was able to put those wings on my son when he became an Air Force pilot. Thank you. And I was at the age where I was fortunate enough I could fly with the Vietnam POWs. Jeff Ellis was one of my instructors at Vance, and we had a great time. In the squadron, Fred Flom, I was able to fly off his wing. And I learned very quickly, we have General Mosley here with us, Chief of the Air Force, 18th Chief. Chief, I learned when you fly with a former POW, there are no rules. And I assure you, as a young first lieutenant, I wanted to fly with Fred Flom because we did things that the Air Force told us we couldn't do. Through the years, we had those great reunions at the ranch. And you remember those T-38 flyby? And Matt Bird, Air Force pilot, Thunderbird, flew the T-38 and he said, hey, boss, what do you want me to do? I said, Birdman, these are POWs. There are no rules. You give them the best possible show you could give them because these men deserve that show. And my wife and I were there, and it was all approved. Because we're right next to DFW Airport. FAA had come in and approved the whole thing. I think Matt might have been about 50 feet in full afterburner when he came over. And what was great is I looked over at the FAA official that was watching us, and he was staring at his feet. He didn't want to report what he saw. And so if you look at the life we've had, my father decides to run for president. Who helps him? Orson Swindle. Orson, you're here. God bless you, Orson, for your friendship. Who is his vice president? Admiral Stockdale. Wonderful Admiral Stockdale. God bless him. And then when General Mosley and I were working on the Air Force Memorial together, when we needed help, who did we go to? Congressman Sam Johnson. We always had Sam, and I would see Sam in the halls of Congress in that golf cart with his Thunderbird patch right at the front of that golf cart with that huge smile. And the last time I saw Sam, he was in our office. He's in his wheelchair with my father. They were touring the POW exhibit at the office. And Sam looked up at my father and he said, Ross, if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be alive today. And that is the most important thing that for our family we could hear, is because we truly love the men that served and were POWs and all the Vietnam veterans. And the impact you've had on my life has been stunning, and it's one that I will never forget. And if you remember our 45th reunion just a few years back, and you remember the B-52 that came over to about 500 feet above the ranch with the bomb bay doors open, again, there was a little bit of that. We had to call General Mosley, say, now, Chief, how do we get this B-52? Somehow it just showed up. And somehow that young pilot, that B-52, understood there were no rules if you had the POWs to take care of. And for you that weren't there, you're flying over neighborhoods on a Friday afternoon at 500 feet with the bomb bay doors open. And the best part of this story is everybody was briefed, everybody knew, neighbors started calling 911, what's happening? And we said, the police all said, they were briefed, they said, look, this is the Vietnam POWs, and everyone said, outstanding, no one filed a single complaint. So you are the spirit of America. You are our heroes. You're what makes this nation great. And thank you for this great impact you've had on my life, my family's life, and on this nation. God bless you, and God bless everybody in this room. Thank you.
Honored guests, amigos all. Like everyone else on this stage tonight, I too went to Vietnam to visit you men. And I went for two reasons. Because my own son was fighting there, and because I wanted to pay my respect. He is home safe, thank God. And because I wanted to pay my respects to all of the men fighting there. But if we are going to get together again, I must much rather do it this way. Not only do I not have to travel so far, but let's face it, the food is a little better here. As for tonight, I am honored, like all of us are, to be here to pay my respects once more to you men who shared the brotherhood of pain and suffering. Thank God that it's all behind you, and that now we can all join hands and share in the brotherhood of peace and joy. I am very grateful to the President for bringing us all together, and to you men for representing your country with such dignity, such courage. You are magnificent.
I'm very honored to be here, very honored to be here with the President of this great country of ours, this President who made this evening possible by getting you men home. You know, I want to tell you, when you fellas stepped off those airplanes, there just wasn't a dry eye in the country. And all of us that were sort of plugging for you, when we suddenly realized that you were really home, it was like the whole world sort of stopped long enough to make things right in this country again. My wishes for you, oh, there are a lot of them. I wish peace for you. I wish calm. I wish you happiness, which you certainly earned, and I think you're going to get it. So, from me and from millions of people who love their country, I just want to thank you for serving your country with honor. And thank you, Mr. President, for making this evening what it is. Thank you.
No, I've been advised to say that if you didn't know it. I want you to a real American right here that did a sensational job in Vietnam, shaking hands, and he's done a great job. He's a great citizen in every category, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. John Wayne, right here.
President, ladies and gentlemen, I guess I feel like all Americans tonight. We're sorry that about 40,000 of your comrades at arms can't be here. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I think this is a great country. It's a lot better off with you fellas back here. I think it was wonderful of the President to bring us all together like this tonight. I'm happy all you fellows and your families could get here to be with him. I feel pretty good that he has this chance to meet you all, because you all have a lot in common. You hung in there when the going was rough. So did he. Stuck by your guns. You stuck by your guns, and so did he. You love this blessed country, and so does he, and so do all of us. You men, I want to say thanks for showing the whole world the kind of men a free country can put up when the going gets rough. You're the best we have, and I'll ride off into the sunset with you anytime. Just one more thing before I sit down. I want to thank you, Mr. President, not for any one thing, just for everything. Thank you.
Ambassador Robert O'Brien knows a thing or two about hostage negotiations. From 2018 to 2019, he served as President Trump's representative, traveling around the world, leading secret negotiations that directly brought 25 distressed Americans home and out of harm's way. Ambassador O'Brien then served as the 27th National Security Advisor to the President of the United States, and the Nixon Foundation today benefits immensely from his strategic guidance as Chairman of the Board of Directors. Please welcome Ambassador O'Brien.
All right, I would have never have agreed to speak in this order following John Wayne, Jimmy Stewart, and Bob Hope. Had you told me that, Jim, I would have gone earlier in the program, but thank you. And Tricia, Melanie, thank you. I feel like we're your guests. I know seeing your father and your grandfather must be bittersweet. I grew up at the time when we saw him on TV every night. You know, there were 3 networks, and hearing that distinctive voice. And it's one of the great things about the Nixon Foundation and the Nixon Library is the families involved. Julie and Tricia and Chris and Melanie and the other members of the Nixon family. And I'm just grateful for you having us tonight. It's very special to have you here. And I think for everyone here, we're grateful for you. So thank you very much. So, Senator, thank you for your words. Governor, Madam First Lady, thank you. Mr. Ambassador, all the general officers we've got here, distinguished guests. It's such a huge honor for Lomri and me to be here. You know, when I was National Security Advisor, I used to have to go over to the Pentagon from time to time, and we'd go in the tank and meet with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the chiefs. You understand that, Chief? And Mark Milley had a running gag. He would do it every time. He'd say, okay, everyone pay attention. We've got Army Reserve JAG Officer Major Robert O'Brien here. He's here to give you a briefing. Pay attention to him. We all kind of laugh. But I sure feel that way today with all of you here. It's such an honor for Lomri and me to be here. You know, in April 1962, there was a White House dinner for Nobel laureates. And there was a famous quote that President Kennedy said. He said, I think this is the most extraordinary collection of talent, of human knowledge that has ever been gathered together at the White House, with the possible exception of when Thomas Jefferson dined alone. Now, that's a great quote, but I think we've got a quote similar tonight that is, here in the East Room of the Nixon Library, we have the most extraordinary collection of human honor, courage, patriotism, and heroism that's ever been gathered anywhere. And I want to thank all the POWs and their families, and especially the families who are here with them tonight. God bless you, and thank you. So it's hard to believe 50 years ago, you were at the White House. 10 years ago, you were here in this beautiful East Room, which for those of us who've been there, it reminds us of that. And now 50 years has passed, and since you've been brought home. And your ranks are thinned, and I know that's hard. But your honor is undiminished. The love of your country and your devotion to duty still inspires all of us. You kept faith with America, and President Nixon and the Nixon family kept faith with you. Now, my years as Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs, I was involved in bringing some Americans home. And during President Trump's term, he brought 55 captives home from around the world. And that experience gave me an appreciation for the skill and the determination and the patience and the persistence that President Nixon and Dr. Kissinger, my predecessor, who we saw earlier, devoted to bringing you home. They had to deal with an intransigent and inhumane enemy, and their efforts were undermined, and I had this happen to me as well, by naive and unhelpful interventions by peace activists and celebrities, well-meaning as they were. Now, on December 18th, 1972, and I had this conversation I was able to visit many of your tables, not all of them, and I look forward to seeing most of you if I didn't see you before. President Nixon made a very tough decision, and it was a controversial decision. He called it the most difficult decision of the war, and that's when he sent the B-52s in, when Operation Linebacker took place. And I found this, in my experience, you had to be tough if you wanted to get our people home. And 4 months after Operation Linebacker, you were all home. Peace or strength. So for all your years of captivities, you men, the prisoners of war, the missing in action, were always foremost in the president's mind. He wrote in his memoirs, each POW was an individual to me. Obtaining their release became a burning cause. He named his close friend and his military aide, General Don Hughes, as the White House liaison. And Dr. Kissinger met weekly with the families, as he mentioned, of the National League of POW and MIA families. From January 20th, 1969, the day he was first inaugurated, until March 29th, 1973, the day the last of you was released and safe, President Nixon focused on bringing you home and bringing you home with dignity. His efforts were the most difficult and most successful hostage negotiation in American history. Now, sadly, the basic knowledge of our shared American history, including your stories, these amazing stories that each of you have, are not being taught to our kids in school, and they're not being learned by Americans. Last year, the Annenberg Public Policy Center, and the Annenbergs were big supporters, as you know, of this foundation, this library, conducted a civic knowledge survey, and it found that 37% of the respondents couldn't name one of the freedoms guaranteed in the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights. Less than 1 in 4 of the respondents could name the religious freedom was one of the freedoms protected in the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights. Only 26% of the respondents to the survey could name the 3 branches of our government. So describing these results of the study, the Center's director warned, we are unlikely to cherish, protect, and exercise the rights if we don't know we have them. Our children and our grandchildren are not learning the principles and values that sustained you in those long nights and those long days in that faraway land. Now, the Nixon Foundation is working to change that, and the Nixon family is working to change that. And so tonight, I'm pleased to announce a $40 million American civics campaign to revive the teaching and understanding of civics and American values in our country. The American Civics Campaign will ensure that the Nixon Library remains an active center for the study of America's heritage and our role in the world. And contributions to the campaign will fund, among other things, the following: the construction of a hands-on education center that will use simulations. You know, we've got to have a little interaction and online learning these days to teach about our Constitution and the extraordinary system of government that our founding fathers gave us, that Senator Carper talked about. The construction of a magnificent special exhibition hall that will be here on the library premises. We've got a nice small hall now. We're going to have a wonderful 15,000 square foot hall that will host visitors from around the world. We'll build a presidential transportation pavilion to permanently house Marine One. Marine One's a great, I had the privilege of flying on Marine One. I know others in the room have. We've got a great Marine One here. It flew President Johnson, President Kennedy, President Nixon, but it's gotten a little wear and tear in the weather. We're going to build a beautiful pavilion to house Marine One, and it'll be a teaching space as well. It'll also house the President's armored Lincoln Continental limousine, which we call the Beast. So I'm happy to tell you we already have $26.1 million in pledges towards our $40 million goal. The government of Qatar is providing half the campaign's entire target with a $20 million gift. Qatar's generosity commemorates the 50th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between the United States and Qatar. And earlier this year, as many of you know, President Biden designated Qatar as a major non-NATO ally of the United States. Now, this 2023 step shows President Nixon's foresight regarding this Gulf ally back in 1972. Again, Nixon, it's 50 years later, and Nixon's in the headlines because of the relationship that he established with the Emir, with a family member and a close family member of the ambassadors. So the Nixon Foundation will name the special exhibition hall for the state of Qatar in recognition of the soaring diplomatic relations between our nations. The state of Qatar and His Highness the Emir are represented this evening by His Excellency Sheikh Michel bin Hamad Al Thani, Qatar's ambassador to the United States. Sheikh. Let me take just a moment and tell you, Michel is not just a colleague, he's a friend. And of note tonight, I can disclose that Ambassador Al-Thani was personally involved in the events leading to the freeing of an American hostage named Jeff Woodkey, who'd been held for many years in Mali. And so, Michel, thank you for your, not only for the contribution of Qatar, but for your efforts on behalf of American hostages and captives around the world. We sincerely appreciate Barbara and Alex Bowie, longtime supporters of the library, for their pledge of $3 million that will go to the construction of the transportation pavilion. And over the past several years, and friends of the library have gotten to know them well, Ling and Charlie Zhang have been very generous donors of the foundation, including the support for tonight's event and the music that was provided here for us, which is, by the way, the music was just terrific. Thank you. Now, on Monday, Charlie, who's a board member and a good friend, informed Jim Byron and me that he and Ling would make a further contribution of $2 million to fund the construction of the transportation pavilion. So, now, I will say this was over lunch, and Ling wasn't with us. And so I said, Charlie, I'm going to announce this, so you may want to tell Ling before the dinner. she doesn't hear about it from me, you know, over the podium. So thank you, Ling, and thank you, Charlie. One of the perks of being the National Security Advisor is you have the opportunity to meet extraordinary Americans. And we have two of them here tonight. You heard from Ross Jr., but Sarah and Ross Perot are great Americans. Thank you for everything you've done for this country. And like the Nixons who got to see their dad and their grandfather, it was great seeing Ross Sr. on, we all grew up with him, watching him on TV, and it was great seeing him. And I know it's probably tough on you that he's not here tonight, but I know he's looking down on us, and so is President Nixon. They're looking, and so are the POWs that aren't with us tonight. They're looking down, and they're proud of everybody here. And so when I reached out, we wanted to do an exhibit with tonight's dinner. And the exhibit, everything costs money these days. And so we turned to the Perots to tell the story. And I probably shouldn't say this. I sent an email. I said, Ross, you know, and I'd gotten to know Ross a little bit before becoming chairman of the library. Can you support this? Is this something you'd be willing to support? And he wrote back and said, we'll handle it. Of course, I didn't tell him how much it was. So we didn't take advantage of him. But we're grateful for that, and we're grateful for the support over the many years, not just tonight, but over the many years that your family and your dad has supported the POWs and the library. Now, talking about hostages, there's something the pros know is, you know, they supported the POWs like nobody else did. But they also know something about getting hostages home. So if you haven't read Ken Follett's On the Wings of Eagles, go and find out about what the pros did and what Ross Perot Jr. Sr. did to get hostages out of Iran. And that's not an easy task. I know it. I was able to get some people home from Iran. Unfortunately, there's still people that are there that I couldn't get home, but it was pretty amazing. So read Ken Follett's book if you get a chance. Now, Richard Nixon said that you were courageous to the POWs. You were courageous in your actions, but you are most courageous in your captivity. And his personal diaries show on a daily basis that he was thinking about you and how humbled he was by your heroism. The president was overwhelmed by the plaque that you presented him that night that we've been watching tonight, this evening. And for those of you, I know the POWs know what it said, but many others may not. It was inscribed, our leader, our comrade, Richard the Lionhearted. He treasured that gift. Now, as we bring this 50th anniversary dinner to a close, let me share a passage from President Nixon's memoirs as he spoke about the first night that we had at the White House. Well, I saw it on TV as a kid, but that you had at the White House. Trish had it at the White House. Trish was only 1 year old at that event. The show did not end until after midnight, he wrote, and the dancing went until after 2 o'clock. But Pat and I went upstairs around 12:30. I kissed her goodnight, and then I went to the Lincoln sitting room. And as I sat before the fire, listening to the sounds of the music and the laughter coming up from downstairs, I felt this was one of the greatest nights of my life. There were no words then, and there are really none now, that could describe the joy and the satisfaction that I felt at the thought that I had played a role in bringing these men back home, and that they, who were so completely courageous and admirable, genuinely seemed to consider the decisions I had made about the war to have been courageous and admirable ones. I'll leave it with that. May God bless you. May God bless the United States of America. And as we close, can I invite you to not to join me, because I can't sing, as my wife will tell you, but together can we sing God Bless America? Thank you. Good night.
Now I'd like to sing a song for you that doesn't take much voice, because what little I ever had has left me completely. But you know the song. I'll sing one chorus for you, and then I'll ask you to finish the rest of it with me. The song, of course, is one that is closer to me than any I've ever written. I'm talking about God Bless America. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans, white with home. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
Everyone, from the mountains to the prairies to the oceans white with foam. Lord bless America, my home, sweet home. Lord bless America, my home, sweet
Thank you to all.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the Vietnam Prisoners of War 50th Anniversary Homecoming. Thank you for coming. God bless you, and God bless America.